This is Wild Bill, military affairs analyst for Redbeard Pirate Radio. Today I would like to talk about heavy and super heavy tanks. Wow, big ones. And I'm going to talk about them in World War II, and I'm specifically going to talk about what is often referred to as Hitler's super weapons, or Wunderwaffe, or Hitler's follies. These involve vehicles like the Jagdtiger and the E100 and the Mouse and others of that ilk. And I would like to speak a moment in favor of these vehicles, strange as it seems, because historians and AFV analysts and experts, Nick Moran, as well as others, are pretty well convinced that these were useless wastes of technology, material, factory space, and that Germany and all the other nations should have been struggling toward a true medium tank, well, a universal tank. I want to point out a couple things that everyone knows, but then put them into perspective so it applies to this paradigm. One, Great Britain had unique problems because it needed to go across an ocean to go anywhere, and on the other side, enemies had to go across an ocean to get to them. That position, that geopolitical position, very much influenced their designs for military vehicles in World War II, World War I, of course, before. Great Britain would need to first protect its transports and transport stuff across the channel and supply it. And so Great Britain concentrated very much on its navy, of course, because without the sea lanes being open, how can Great Britain move any military anywhere? That colored Great Britain's thoughts as to how armies should be arranged, what they need in them, how much material you should spend, how you're going to move it. Germany didn't have that problem. Germany was on the continent. And here's the thing about being on the continent. You have a bunch of coastline. And that coastline needs defended. And for Germany, historically, yeah, Germany had to defend that coastline. Look what happened. So I have something to say about it with regard to these super heavy tank projects. Germany is well known, I think, among most military historians, for having a hodgepodge collection of superannuated World War I super guns, giant guns, which they used as coastal defense weapons in the 30s and World War II. Now these required independent supply chains, factories producing unique ammunition, a great number of, detour of men, material, training, concrete, gunpowder, high explosive, to these areas, and they would just sit there. As a matter of fact, most of them were never used because we didn't invade everywhere. We just invaded the places we thought were the soft spots. As Churchill would say, the soft underbelly. I think he had a thing for. I'm not going to elaborate. But anyway, if you look at the coastline that Germany had to defend, the one way to see it is, well, we'll build a series of forts, a chain of forts like the Romans would, or the Revolutionary War soldiers would. Chain of forts, each within range of its, to support its brothers close by, and all the way along the coast. As a matter of fact, sort of a coastal version of the Maginot Line. Fortifications, interleaved, interlocked. The problem is, as Speer says several times in his memoir, that requires an incredible amount of men, material, resource, and effort to do that. And then, as I pointed out earlier, most of it just sits there and wastes time, wastes energy, wastes men, wastes material. You could use those troops. You could use that steel, put more stuff on the front instead of sitting back here nowhere with a special caliber gun that nobody else uses, and who knows if you're going to get it on time if you're in trouble. So here's an alternative. Instead of having all those railheads, because every one of those coastal gun emplacements has a railhead close by. Otherwise, how are you going to re-equip it? How are you going to move stuff to it? How are you going to repair? You're going to move troops in and out. And in the 30s and 40s, that was by train. In the 20s, the 30s, and 40s, that was by train. So there were train tracks that ran all along the coast, and these ran to special stub lines that would then lead to a turntable, and on these turntable they'd place a big gun on the top, a turntable, or in a concrete emplacement where it had a more limited traverse, but it was better protected. This required enormous amounts of concrete. Spear complained about it. As a matter of fact, he was the guy that talked volumes of concrete beyond anything anyone had ever thought using before. And probably because of him, in part, the world's running out of sand. Is that crazy or what? Anyway, these guns that Germany used were all of different caliber. Well, standardized for the nations that used them, and made them in small production runs, because the age of mass production began probably with World War I. So you'll find a lot of 7.7 Feldkanone, a lot of the standard German World War I artillery piece, but you certainly won't find too many 8-inch guns, 203 millimeter guns, 210 millimeter howitzers, mortars. But you will find some. That was every nation had a siege train. All the major European nations had some kind of massive fortification bombarding big bore gun or mortar or howitzer. So this is a logistical nightmare. And as many people have been saying lately, part of the beauty of the modern revisionist is that they are seeing some things clearly that we didn't see in the old days. And one of those things that we didn't see clearly in the old days was that World War II is a matter of logistics, as well as both idiocy at the top and idiocy in the middle. And of course, a lot of men at the bottom died, being sick, being lonely away from home, coming back scarred. Some of them never coming back, even if your body was with you. So, either you could build a series of individual fortresses all along the coast, which is hugely expensive men and material, and also look at all the trains you're going to have to run ammunition and men back and forth, and hospitals and all that stuff you have to have with them. Or you could have those same trains just carry a couple super heavy tanks up near the coast. They debark, they grind on up to a pit, and they lower their gun, over the berm like you would in Iraq, and you wait for the Allied fleet to show up. You would only do this where you expected them to be in a short term. You wouldn't want to do it in, like to say, let's do this for all the 1940s. No, you would have coastal radars. The coastal radars would say, hey, we see concentrations of British warships, Schlachtschiffs or whatever, and it looks like they're going to invade these spots, or we have intel that says they're going to invade these spots. Then you move these heavy tanks by rail, and each heavy tank is a self-contained fortress. Each Jagdtiger is a destroyer cannon capable of damaging a cruiser, capable of bothering a battleship. One gun. As much armor as any cruiser has. So it's an extremely efficient piece of material when you consider it as coastal defense. Those 5-inch guns, the 12.8 centimeter KWK 40 L56, I think, was an excellent gun, as good as anybody's destroyer gun, and hit very hard. Now, if you had a battalion, I don't know what you would call a battalion of super heavy tanks, probably wouldn't be 47, but still, you had 14, say, or 16 or 17 of these super heavy tanks. They'd be pretty easy to move by train, especially across France. It was a lot of open country, and up to the coast, where now you have X number of super heavy tanks instead of so many static fortresses that you can photograph from the air, and you can say, hey, let's avoid these, and all that effort wasted. Instead, you have a couple of heavy tanks, super heavy tanks, and they're going to pull up behind a ridge and into specially prepared, you just dugout. Just move up into a dugout, just like you do anytime you dig in tanks. and they can probably take on the whole Allied invasion fleet. And if fire starts coming in, they can back up, go behind the hillside, go left or right a couple of miles, and pull up again and start shooting again. This is something you can't do with a fortress. Two things you can't do with a fortress. One is you can't have a fortress react to wherever it happens, but you can with these vehicles. You can be mounted on a train and taken where they're needed. All right, so that argues for Jagdtiger, that also argues for E100, that also argues for Maus, because in spite of the expense, in spite of the difficult nature of super heavy chunks of armor being welded together by new material, by new processes, and men learning on the fly to do this stuff, instead of that, consider the alternative, which is 40 different calibers of World War I guns of questionable ability, and all their ammunition train and specialized magazines dug out, specialized this and specialized that, barracks for the troops, and all the stuff that you don't need if all you do is drive a battalion of super heavy tanks up to the coast and let fly. You still have a logistic train, but you're already prepared for that. With an armored battalion, an armored division, you have a very easily quantified series of units that are capable of being moved by train in discrete units. They did it all across France, even under bomber fire. You know what I mean? So it's a thing to do. Now, in this light, the E100, the Maus with a 12.8 centimeter gun, they were later supposed to put a 15 centimeter gun, that's a 6-inch gun, in the Maus, and the Maus with over 200 millimeters of armor. So the Maus has as much armor as the best heavy cruiser. As a matter of fact, as much as the Hood almost. So a Maus has as much armor as the Hood, has far less vulnerable places considering what's facing the enemy coming at them, because the Hood would be traveling broadside shooting with all 8 guns. And here the Maus has got 8 inches of armor that anything it shoots at it has to go through before it can bother the crew. That's a better investment in dollars, I think. So as a relatively quick reaction force, the super heavy tank is advantageous in every way I can think. It saves you on concrete, it saves you on effort, it saves you on thousands and thousands of men digging and digging and digging, pouring concrete, spending all this effort that you could be spending building roads into Russia and the Soviet Union, right? All those units should have been pushing the roads and the rails forward in the Soviet Union, not building up extensive defenses along the coast, most of which would never be used. So instead, we have a couple, battalions of schwer Panzerjagers, Jagdpanzers. So you have these giant mice, or the Jagdtiger. You have these guys along your coast, and it's much easier to move them, much easier to put them right where they're needed, and to prepare a position for them is pretty much just a bulldozer. And like what, 20 minutes? So this is the most mobile form of coastal defense I could think of before you use aircraft in large numbers. And this makes anybody's coast defensible. Internal lines of supply. This is supposedly a good thing, at least in an old and kind of bankrupt military idea. But it does have advantages here. And what we know about Germany and Prussia especially, but Germany is also infamous for its ability to move large amounts of material by rail in a short period of time. And one of the reasons that the invasion of the Soviet Union failed was because of the German inability to move the rails along with the panzer divisions and even the infantry divisions, because they can march, but their supply has to come up too. And if their supply doesn't move faster than they march, it will never catch up to them. So you need rails, and you need those rails moving into the Soviet Union. You don't need them being built along the coastline. There are already rails capable of doing what I want to do along the coastline without doing any intensive building up and pouring of concrete and reinforcing and all that stuff. So you just have tanks pull up, and they're hard to see from the sea. You pull up in a battleship, and you say, like, well, where are the big coastal emplacements for me to bombard? And suddenly you see little winks of light here and there. Rounds start dropping into the sea around you. Maybe one hits the bridge. Something I noticed about World War II, How many battleships and cruisers took hits to the bridge and like wiped out the whole bridge crew except one person or two people? I mean, they killed the admiral. This happened on multiple occasions. This is something I don't always get others on board with, and that's okay. We all think differently. But another problem I have with that is when I say that no cruiser should have had torpedo tubes because look what happened to them. They're like, what do you mean? The torpedoes were great. Look at the Japanese torpedoes at Savo Island. Look at I'm like, no, no. Those same cruisers you're talking about took hits to their torpedoes and that broke their back. They go, no, no, no. And then I go look at the records and yes, yes, yes. Japanese cruisers, almost all of them, were destroyed because of detonations of their torpedoes on deck. Sympathetic detonation. And times they took other fire or took direct hits to the torpedoes. And this was a significant factor in the death of Japanese cruisers all through the war. People kind of ignore that, and well, I probably ignore other stuff, so I'm not saying that I'm better. I'm just saying this is something I seem to have noticed that others passed by. So yeah, the mouse was a good idea. Yeah, the E100 was a good idea. And yeah, those giant Waffentrager that they were going to build on the Mouse hull and the E100 hull and the King Tiger hull, all those giant gun carriers, was a great idea for them. Because they're going to be used as coastal defense weapons. And that makes it, consider that against Maginot. Consider the difference between defending your whole border with tanks that can be moved to hotspots as opposed to building extensive fortifications all along the border and keeping those men basically trapped there, which is what happened in Maginot. They bypassed them, and those men just withered on the vine and had to surrender. How about that? How about that? So, there is an argument, I believe, to be made for the German super heavy tanks. They'll use less gas than all those trucks and all those trains and everything moving them giant guns around and all the ammunition stuff. They'll save ammunition. They'll save manpower. They'll save a lot of stuff. And in the areas we're talking about, a lot of times these big heavy tanks can just move across the earth. I mean, they'll tear it up, but you don't care. You have people to sweep over that or lay brush upon it so that the Allied fighters don't see you removing. The Germans are experts at that, at camouflage on the road. And in position. I've seen some of the training films. You can find them on YouTube for Panzerjäger, or for Panzergrenadier on defense. Some really good films. The Germans made incredible combat training films in World War II. They look real, and you feel for the Russian soldiers falling dead, even though you know they're actors, or you hope they are. So, I think that the King Tiger was a good idea, not great. The Mouse was a much better idea, and the Mouse with the 15-centimeter gun or the E100 were excellent ideas as mobile coastal defense units. I'd rather have 17 of those where I need them than 100 guns spread across the coast and only 2 or 3 are where they're needed. Wild Bill, 7th of May, 2023.